few weeks ago, I went to the Stanley Hotel for a tour. I had some relatives come to visit me here in Denver, and I wanted to give them a taste of the mountains. If you don't know, the Stanley Hotel is a awesome, luxurious hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, that was built by F.O. Stanley, the man who invented the Stanley steamer, steam engine. Um, and it was the inspiration for the Stephen King novel and subsequent movie, The Shining. So as I sat there waiting for the tour to begin with about 25 other people, a man in a leather jacket eating a candy bar, walking with an extreme sense of poise and authority to the front of the room, just kind of gets up there and stands there. So he's standing there, looking everyone in their seats, waiting to finish chewing the last bite of the candy bar. And he eventually throws the wrapper in the trash can and tells everybody that he is our tour guide. And I was excited because he walked in with such a presence to him. And the funny thing is, a few days prior, we did this pub crawl ghost tour thing, and it just did not go well. But this seemed very promising, and I'm kind of like a history guy, so I was excited. So the tour eventually starts, and we follow him, basically like a bunch of ducks in a row, moving room to room, learning a lot about the hotel, the town, F.O. Stanley. And we eventually ended up in a room with an American flag displayed very prominently on the wall. And he begins to tell us a story about it. And the story goes like this. The Stanley Hotel has about 1,200 bottles of different whiskey, maybe even a little more. And one night, a man who is an Iraq war vet went to the bar by himself, as we do, and he starts drinking. And not long after, another man shows up and starts drinking with him. And as they sit there, they get drunk, they tell each other stories. And the Iraq war vet eventually starts telling the man about one of his deployment experiences. He was in a vehicle that was hit by an IED, which ended up killing several or all, I can't remember, of the other people in the vehicle. And the vehicle was completely demolished except for one thing, which was an American flag they had posted up somewhere on top of the truck. It turns out that the man that the Iraq war vet was talking to was the owner of the Stanley Hotel. And when the vet finished telling the story, the owner told him how it would be an honor to display the flag in his hotel, and the vet can place it anywhere he wants. And so after the tour guide finished that story, he mentioned that he served in the Army and had several deployments under his belt. And once I heard him mention that, and, keeping in mind his storytelling ability and his presence, I was like, I knew this was a guy that I wanted to come on and tell some experiences. So today I'm talking to Robert, the candy bar eating, storytelling Cav Scout from Longmont, Colorado.
My name is Robert. I got out as a specialist. I grew up here in northern Colorado, a little town called Longmont, which has actually turned into one of the fastest growing towns in the United States, apparently. That's how I wound up finding myself working up at the Stanley Hotel as a tour guide. I started off as a security contractor, and they were looking for tour guides, so I sent them my resume, and they hired me. I've been doing that for almost a year now. And before that, I did a number of jobs, but my time in service was between 2005 and 2010. I was based out of Fort Bliss, Texas. My first unit was 4th Brigade, 1st Cav. I was with 1-9 Charlie Troop. And then second deployment, I was with 4th Brigade, 1st Armored. It was Charlie Troop 213 Cav. We had infantry, we had mortars, we had everything. It was, and I know it's a Cav unit, but we had everything.
So is Cav mainly, is it armored vehicles, or is it, obviously they're all armored, but is it like Strikers, or are we talking like MRAP style?
It really depends on the unit, because I'm pretty sure there are some that use Strikers. I was a Humvee and a Bradley driver. And then I guess Cavalry and Armor are now all the same division, is what I was told by someone who stayed in longer than me. So it's the Cross Sabers with the tank in front of it. And now it covers all of that stuff. So you got tankers, you got cav, you've got artillery, all that stuff falls into that.
Is a Bradley more or less a tank?
So it looks like a tank, but what it really is it's an APC with a turret and a 20 millimeter chain gun with a 7.62 coax on top. So it's a tank buster is what it really is made to be. But it can carry a full section's worth of personnel, up to 8 people.
Yeah, from the guys I knew that were in them, they thought they're pretty badass vehicles, and the
Oh, they're
Strikers
great.
too, for that matter. Yeah, so you did 2 deployments, right? One to Iraq, one to Afghanistan, I think you said?
No, they were both Iraq. I was up in the whole northern sector really. We started in Mosul and then wound up going to Talafar and then finished up in Rabia, which is right on the Syrian border. And then my second tour, I was in a little JSS on the Iranian border, halfway between Al Amara and Al Qut.
Gotcha. That's on the eastern side of Iraq, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's north of the salt marshes where the advance stopped during Desert Storm.
That's pretty badass. I did a on my deployment, it was pretty cool to see all the Russian stuff that went on. It was kind of like interesting for me to get another perspective on the area.
That was in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I mean
I would have loved to see that.
yeah, it was well, there's a lot of mines and stuff as you'd expect, but when we got there, there was a ton of blown up buildings that weren't from the United States, and probably the funniest thing is that there's a lot of white kids running around, or at least more than you'd expect. So a lot of our assumptions were, like the Russians were getting it in with some of the Afghan women, but Afghanistan's weird in general because there's like people that look, East Asian, people that look, how we would think is Middle Eastern. There's whitish looking people. It's kind of interesting.
Iraq was kind of the same way, like up in the north, especially because once you get up there closer to Turkey, you get into Kurdistan, you get people who you'd never know they were Middle Eastern because they're just south of Germany at that point. They're not that far from Europe itself. So it gets pretty interesting.
Do you have any good stories you like to tell from either your deployments?
Oh,
Or should I say, how many do you have that are worth telling?
I have one in particular that I tell a lot. And I think this was kind of the point when like stuff just started to change for me mentally. Like it became very real. And anytime someone says, "Tell me a story about when you're deployed," this is the story I tell them. It was the first time I ever took contact when I was in country. And I still remember it really vividly. We were doing a late night patrol. It was probably around 1 o'clock in the morning, and late, let's see, November, maybe late November, early December, and I wasn't even supposed to be there. I was covering down for one of the other guys in my troop who got put on radio guard duty on another little JSS section of the FOB up there in Mosul. And so I got to take his place as a driver. It wasn't my truck. It wasn't my crew. I was just along for the ride, and they made us lead vehicle. And we're driving through Mosul, and all night I got a bit of a lead foot, and we're trying to do a deliberate patrol, going really slow, and I keep getting ahead of everybody, and they keep calling me over the radio to slow down. We're driving nods on, blackout through the city. And I take a turn. We were heading down along River Road, which follows the Tigris as it comes through Mosul. And I hung a left onto Market Street, or Route Nissan, as they called it. And I look in my mirror off to the side on my Humvee, and I realize that I'm getting ahead of everybody again. They're way back there, and they're just rounding the corner. So I take my foot off of the gas, and you got those Humvees with all the up armored windows and stuff on the turret and all the heavy doors. As soon as you take your foot off the gas, they start to stop. I wasn't going all that fast to begin with. And almost immediately, a contrail comes whipping across my hood just above the sea wire that we had tied down to the hood, and it hits the building just to the left of my truck. It showers debris all over my truck and all kinds of mess falling down on top of us. My gunner had been hunched down in his turret. He and the TC were chit chatting, and in his flurry of limbs trying to get to his gun, he wound up kicking the radio switch. So we're trying to communicate with everyone behind us, and we can't because we're not on the same net. We wind up figuring that out. We get called back. They're thinking we're hit by an IED and we're disabled, and we have to tell them no, we're good. It's not an IED. It was an RPG. My gunner's tangled up in the sling of his rifle, making all kinds of mess. He managed to get 2 pot shots off at the guy who tried taking us out with his RPG as he took off down an alley. And it took about 2 blocks of driving before that finally caught up with me, and I realized that that guy was specifically trying to kill me, because if you kill the driver, the truck is not going anywhere. And he wanted to take me out with a rocket. And I looked at the maps later on after we got back, and just off to the side of the road there, it just looks like trees. But beyond the tree line, there's a big parking lot for Market Street. And I think what they were trying to do was take out the lead vehicle of our convoy, so everyone would stack up for recovery, and then they would ambush us from that parking lot. But they missed. And it was like that one moment where everything, all the training that I'd gotten, everything I'd learned about how they operate and everything else, it all came together for me in one swift moment of, oh shit. And then it was over. But at that point, life has changed. Someone just deliberately tried to kill you. You never come back from that.
Yeah. And you looked at the map afterwards, right? Like you kind of got back, collected your thoughts, and that's when you kind of did like I don't even know, the assessment of like the area, and kind of came to the conclusion that they were trying to ambush.
Yeah. Because it's a perfect ambush site, especially late at night. I mean, we had nods on and stuff, but if they're hunkered down behind trees and a berm and all that stuff, there's no way we're going to know they're there. And this guy took his shot from behind a little fruit cart right at the end of the road. So it's like, I saw his head pop up after he missed. He was looking to see if he had hit me, but he realized that I was not gone and he needed to get out of there.
So he was close enough to see then.
Yeah.
God dang. Do you think that vehicle could have withstood a RPG shot?
There's a couple different things I've thought about. Like the angle it was coming at, it might have bounced off of my windshield and hit the building and detonated, because you got to hit the nose on those things in order to get them to really do their thing. Yeah. But I have a feeling had it been an actual impact, it still probably would have done some damage to me, because those windows are 4 inches thick, but I cracked one of them with a rock that I was chucking at one of the guys in my unit.
Holy shit.
One time. So like they'll only go so far, and RPG's got some punch behind it. So it's hard to say.
Plus, don't they have like a cone mechanism or something like that actually pushes it kind of pinpoints the explosive?
Yeah. So what happens is when the nose on that rocket gets pushed in, it creates a kind of a 2-part explosion. There's a funnel charge that punches a hole through, and then there's the actual detonation, which blows that open and blasts everything inward behind it. So it's 2 separate explosions at once. One to actually crack the surface, because they're made for taking out tanks. Right. And then a second one to actually do the concussive damage inside.
Yeah, man, that is I'm just kind of starting this project out, but I feel like people's first experience with that type of thing is going to be a theme, because it's just such a life-changing moment.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a blog about it at one point, and it goes into a little bit more detail about what was going on. But the title of it is After That, Everything Changed.
Right.
And really, I think that's everyone I've talked to, that's been their experience, is once they have that first time when they come into contact and someone's trying to kill them, everything changes. The rose colored lenses come off, and you realize that you're mortal.
Right.
It's a very rude introduction to your very, very real mortality.
For sure. What was the rest of your experience like?
Let's see. And we did a lot.
Yeah.
I got to experience a lot of interesting things. One of the things that really I think sticks out, and it's not even necessarily the combat side of things, is being able to go over and see a third world country that is war torn and falling apart. But I think everyone has at least one experience where they found themselves somewhere that they just looked around and they realized if it wasn't for all of the war and all of the fighting and all of the mess, this would be a beautiful place to be. And the first time that really hit me, we were at a dam. We were doing a security inspection or something on a dam. There's this great big reservoir down in a valley. It's very lush and green, and it was up north, kind of closer to Dahook than actual Mosul. But I remember just looking around and thinking, this, I can see why people would want to live here. And it's so weird to come back with that kind of experience, because you think of Iraq, you think war torn desert shanty towns and mud huts and all that stuff, but then there's always those little gems. And I think that's what more of us should probably have held on to, is remembering those little gems that we come across of why it's such a beautiful place. Oh man, it's the idea of the outpost. Like, that's where I spent most of my deployments. I was only on a fob really for the beginning of my first deployment. After that point, we went out to Talafar. And from Talafar, we actually got called back to a prison just outside of Mosul. There was a prison break. I don't know if you can hear the air quotes in my tone of voice. But there's a prison break where a bunch of HVTs had been let free. They were being held at this prison outside of Mosul. And what had actually happened was all the guards got paid off, and these guys pulled in with a bunch of sedans, took everyone that they wanted from the prison and drove out. No one did anything about it. So, of course, a couple of very high-ranking individuals got a little egg on their face. They were pretty embarrassed. So they wanted to make sure it couldn't happen again. So we got called back from Talafar to build an outpost inside of the walls of this prison so that we could be there as a security element while they were training up a whole new guard force to replace the guys who were all fired. And being part of the experience of building an outpost like that had to be one of the most difficult lessons learned I think I've ever gotten to be a part of, because we kind of went out there not entirely having a really solid plan. And we spent the first couple of weeks that we were there sleeping in our trucks, pulling 24-hour guard shifts and stuff with sea wire around them in a little parking lot in the middle of a prison in northern Iraq, completely exposed, with nowhere to really go if we needed to. And it was awful. I didn't shower for weeks on end. I actually got to the point where I used the shower in the building that we turned into our radio shack. It was originally the Iraqi armory and like a small barracks. And we kicked them out of there, and we took over the building, and it had a shower in it that was just like a pipe with a valve on it and a hole in the ground for it to drain into. It smelled, I mean, you know how those places smell. And yeah, I actually got down to the point where instead of waiting for them to come out and build a shower because they kept putting it off and putting it off, I finally used that. And it's like something you'd see on Discovery Channel. You know, someone's down in the jungle and they've got this little like shower hovel that they can use in this village in the jungle, and that's what it looked like, but in the desert. And the water smelled like gasoline, and it was like it one of those moments where you kind of stop and you go, "What have I done with my life? What am I doing here?" But then you get back and you're like, "I want to go back." And you re-enlist so you can go back for a second tour because it was worth it.
Did you re-enlist?
Oh yeah.
Oh snap.
Yeah, I re-enlisted to go back on my second tour. I was supposed to get out at 3 years, and that started rolling up on me, and I was like, oh no, they're going back. I want to go with them.
So you were
So
able
I
to
did.
re-enlist just for the deployment then, the second deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
I didn't get anything else out of it. I got to re-enlist and stay with my unit to go back to Iraq with all the guys that I had been with.
That's some dedication right there for sure. Pretty similar experiences or different between the two?
Well, the second was it was a lot different because it was a very different part of Iraq, but it was also a very different stage in what we were doing there. This was at the point when the SOFA agreement had gone into effect, so we weren't supposed to shoot at cars that were coming up on our convoys anymore. We were supposed to be transitioning over to the Iraqis taking over everything, and we were just there to observe and assist, kind of thing. And it was scarier, but I was also out in the middle, much more out in the middle of nowhere than I ever had been my first deployment. And I think one of the scariest things about that was having to navigate through the minefields that have been left behind during the Iraq-Iran conflict back in the 70s and 80s.
Ugh, yeah, I would.
Because those are all still there.
God, I would hate that. I had the most anxiety being in vehicles. We had 7 rollovers in our company, which was only about 120 people, and no one was killed actually, surprisingly. But just so many dirt roads and so many hills, and these top heavy trucks would just roll like. But there's times we would go be on ledges that were, or not even ledges, some type of cliff road that would drop hundreds of feet. And I was a gunner. I remember just looking down and being like, Jesus Christ, like, this is not good. Roads collapse and you hit the wrong bump and the whole thing shifts around. So yeah, I hated that.
Yeah, there were a few spots like that where we'd have to go out and we would do training. My second tour, we would do training with the Iraqi Border Patrol, Iraqi police, and Iraqi Army guys. And some of their forts are literally like in the middle of nowhere. Like you'd have a hard time finding them just in general. And we're taking these roads that are starting to get washed out and they're barely wide enough for the Humvees and stuff. I had a driver. His name was Small, and he was a terrible driver. he was scared of our truck, and he was scared of driving, and he was supposed to be driving with nods at night and stuff like that. And he's always telling these stories about driving, how the young privates and stuff are driving back from the club drunk. I've done this a million times, and he can't handle a Humvee to save his life. And one night we were coming back and he was falling behind. We were second or third vehicle. He was falling behind. He was having a hard time because the road was just wide enough for the Humvee, and there were spots where it was washed out. You practically had to do a mini Dukes of Hazzard jump over these little ravines that had washed through the road. And he was just panicking so bad that I told him to get up in the gun, and I took over the truck. And we got back, and he was singing my praises, man. He was like, I don't have a lot of great things to say about you because you're an asshole, but you made that Humvee your bitch. And that was like my favorite thing anyone ever said while I was over there, because it just made me laugh so hard. But yeah, just like crazy washouts and things, caves, like right along the Iranian border. There's spots that look like they had been underwater for a really long time and finally just dried up. And there's all kinds of caves and like stone spires and things that are naturally occurring and stuff. And we had to try and figure out how to maneuver through all that stuff to get to these little outposts in the middle of nowhere to train these guys. Half the time when we got there, they were like, no, we don't want to train today.
Yeah, I'm totally familiar with that experience. Our primary mission was to train A&A, the police force, which I think were called ADP or something, and then the AESG, which were the guard tower guys. So, yeah, I remember just trying to train them, and it was like, honestly, it was kind of like trying to train a gymnastics class in third grade. But I think we're good to wrap up.
Cool.
And so I just want to thank you very much for coming on, and that definitely appreciated your stories very much, and that I hope we can chat again sometime soon.
Yeah, no problem, man.
That was Robert Balise, or Balise. Most likely both those pronunciations are wrong, though. If you want to see how his last name is actually spelled, you can go to the podcast website, intheaterpodcast.com. Also, if you want to learn more about Robert, you can go to his blog, graymatterguano.blog. Or you could visit him at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. If you're interested in telling some of your deployment stories, you can reach out to me at intheaterpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website and fill out the short form in the schedule a chat section. Thanks for checking out the podcast, and if you like it, please let me know by rating it.